Hi, I'm Jamie Hargrove with the Hargrove firm. I'm the founding partner and started my practice in public accounting right out of law school. And after I got my CPA, got hired to be a tax lawyer. And then in the early 90s, decided I was just going to be a tax lawyer in the estate and trust, business succession planning. So for almost over 30 years now, that's the world that I've lived in. And so what I want to talk to you about today is one of the trusts where the worlds of estate planning and income tax planning kind of get married. And we do what we call a BEIT trust. And we do this and combine this with our exit planning, where we're advising clients on the sale of their business. Many times we're bringing in this BEIT, and it's a Beneficiary Defective Inheritors trust. That's what a BEIT is. It's not a common trust. It's a very complex trust. It's a trust that is kind of maneuvering around the whole shifting of income tax and who's paying the income tax in this trust, which is very unusual. It's an unusual trust, but it is a trust that's right out of the Internal Revenue Code. So the Internal Revenue Code has a code section 678, and I'm not going to quote a bunch of code sections, but except that one. But that code section actually talks specifically about this trust. Now, they don't call it a BEIT, but what they say is that someone other than the person that sets up the trust is treated as the grantor of this trust under the grantor trust rules. I'm not going to go into all the details about how the grantor trust rules, but for purposes of today, trust me, it's a pretty unique and a pretty useful trust. And it's a trust that because somebody else is actually going to set this trust up for you. So if we have a 55-year-old client and the client has a parent living, then we may have that father or that mother actually set up the trust. And our client immediately says, wait, I don't want my family involved in my estate plan. Well, that's okay, because what I need for them to genuinely set up the trust, which means they sign the trust, and they're going to now put some money into the trust. Maybe it's $2,500, $5,000 max. In fact, the most they can put in that trust, or they should put in it, is $5,000. Again, that's right out of the Internal Revenue Code sections too. So now what I've got this trust that a family member has set up. And you say, well, that's kind of quirky. So let me give you an example. So let's just say I'm talking to your father who's 80 years old, and your father says to me, Jamie, I want to set up a trust for my son. I said, great. What are you going to put in it? Well, times are kind of tough, and of course they grew up in times when times are really tough. I think I'm going to put $5,000 in. But I don't want to give it to my son because maybe I don't trust to my daughter-in-law or for whatever reason. I just want to put it in a trust. I think that would be a good thing. So I say, all right, so we're going to put $5,000 in a trust. So what do you want this trust to say? Well, it's for my son. Even though I want it in a trust, you get with him. Let him design it. I don't really care. I just, whatever he says. So guess what? I get with you. You're the son. You're going to tell me what you're going to put in this. We're going to design your estate plan inside this trust because your father said you could do that. And now your father says, all right, I'm going to put $5,000 in there. So what's he going to do? Well, I go back to your father and say, hey, Mr. Smith, who do you want to be trustee? Do you want to be trustee of this trust? He says, oh, gosh, no, I don't want to be trustee. I don't want to fool with it. I don't have time. I'm busy. I get up at 10 and I go to bed at 8, and I don't have time between that time period to be a trustee of a trust. Let my son be trustee. Oh, perfect. So I go back to you, the son, right? And now you're going to be trustee. So that means you're in charge of this trust. So now your father is going to give you a check for $5,000 made payable to you as trustee of the trust that we've just created that is for your benefit. And guess what? Your father is done with it. He signed the trust. He gave you the check. He has nothing to do with this trust. I mean, nothing. He's nowhere mentioned anywhere else in the trust. The trust is now a funded trust. So what we have, though, is because somebody else set up the trust, we can design that trust with you having all kinds of control, rights, access, use of funds that we could never do if you were setting up the trust. So traditional estate planning says, I go to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, what do you want to do? I want to set up some estate planning. And what they do is they set up a trust, and sometimes they're called SLATs, spousal access trust, right? Well, the problem with that is whoever sets up the trust can't benefit from the trust. And depending on how the trust is, they may not even have any control over the trust. Well, that's not a very good kind of trust. I mean, who wants a trust that says I can't benefit from the assets that I put in it because maybe I'm ready to give some stuff to the kids? That's fine, and those kind of trusts work fine. But if we're talking about the big stuff in your estate, then we got to get it into a trust that you benefit from. So now suddenly I have this world's greatest trust. Dad set up this trust. I get to benefit from it. But what's the problem with that trust? Well, the problem with the trust is it's only got $5,000 in it. That's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to grow that trust. And now we're going to use sophisticated estate planning techniques that have been around 30 years to actually create shifting of value from your taxable estate. And using these techniques, many of which are sales transactions into the trust at discounted, we're going to use all kinds of discounted methods to reduce the value of assets using non-voting interest, restructuring things, sometimes creating levels of discounts, and then we're going to sell all this stuff over to the trust at a great bargain to the trust. So if I have $30 million of assets, but we get appraisals and values that says, well, really all that real estate and these things are really only worth $20 million based on some very conservative folks that we have out there that are doing appraisals and valuations. And then, so that gets me down to $20 million. I've really got $30 million of value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to now restructure that so there's voting and non-voting, put all that into a holding company, create voting, non-voting interest, 2% voting, 98% non-voting as an example. I'm now going to go to maybe our national valuation practice, forensic accounting valuation practice up in Cincinnati, or to someone that you may know, and we're now going to value the 98% non-voting interest. And the reason we're going to value that is now we're going to sell it to the trust. Well, we got $30 million of assets that now we've got appraisals and so forth that's got it to $20 million. Now what we're going to do is we're probably going to get as much as maybe another $8 million of valuation discount on that $20 million. So let's just say that we get a 35% discount. So we're down $7 million off the 20. So I got $20 million, reduce that by a 35% discount. I'm now down to $13 million. So now I have a block of stock that in a holding company that's got all this stuff in it, and I'm going to sell it for $13 million to the trust that's only got $5,000. Now there's all kinds of additional hoops that we've got to jump through to make this commercially reasonable and so forth. Won't get into that today, but at the end of the day, what you have is you've got a $30 million block of assets in your trust through these structures, and what's in your estate is a note payable to you for $13 million. So in this example, I've pushed out virtually overnight $17 million in asset values, plus the appreciation on $30 million. So imagine you pay the interest a little bit every year, right? And your $30 million of assets over the next 20 years doubles in value. You know, it only has to grow at about 3.6% a year for that to double in value over 20 years. So now I have $60 million in the trust, and yet it still owes me the $13 million that's in my taxable estate. So the difference between that $60 million and that $13 million, that's creating almost a $20 million estate tax savings to your family, to your kids and grandkids and whoever. And yet it's in a trust that you control, you have access, use of, very flexible. It's a great plan. It doesn't involve having to use your exemptions before the Trump exemptions expire and all of that. That's a whole different world. And what we believe is that this world, what I've just described to you, actually trumps the Trump planning. So I hope you enjoy this creative, exciting opportunity for you to do. And when you combine that with someone getting ready to sell their business, it really is a home run. Have a great day.